Greetings. Welcome to our series of weekly devotionals where we take a look at one of the lectionary readings and offer a few thoughts for reflection. And this week we're going through a passage in chapter 32 of the book of Genesis, a story of Jacob, a famous story, well-known story of Jacob wrestling with God by the river. A couple of weeks ago we celebrated here in our church World Communion Sunday. Thinking about all the Christians all over the globe who are also celebrating communion with us on that same day. And one of the thoughts that I read about as I was preparing for that particular service is how we so often think of communion as something we receive. We receive the sacraments. We are handed the bread and handed the wine or the juice, and we partake of them, and we receive God's presence through the sacrament. We receive that blessing, that reminder. We receive communion. I've always thought of it that way. But I read something that said that World Communion Sunday, thinking about all these people around the globe, Christians who live in faraway places and who, many of them live in places of need, great need, and times of need. It's a good occasion to remember that Jesus, during the Last Supper, this act that we commemorate with communion, Jesus served. Jesus served his disciples, his friends. Jesus gave them communion. And so it's an opportunity for us to think about how we might serve communion to one another, to serve communion to others, and just in general, help and serve and give. It was an opportunity to think about our faith in terms not of receiving, but in terms of giving. Now, this story in Genesis, about Jacob, is often described by Bible scholars as sort of a metaphor or indicative, symbolic of the journey of faith. There are so many elements of the story that are kind of similar or in line with each of our journeys of faith, the need to be responsible and accountable in those journeys, the need sometimes to wrestle with God, to struggle in our journeys of faith, to struggle with others as well, and also the opportunities to explore new possibilities, the calling to challenge the status quo. All of these are sort of hallmarks of each of our journeys of faith. And there's also something important in this passage that I think is worth noting. In verse 29, Jacob asks God, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And then he blessed him. That small detail, Jacob, even though this is very much a story of Jacob moving into a new possibility, a very prosperous future, the story reminds us that in Jacob's journey, he doesn't get everything that he asks for. He asks for God's name and he's refused. And it reminds us of something important in our journeys of faith. We do not always get what we want. Perhaps that might remind us also that, our prayers aren't always answered the way we would like them to, and in our lives in the congregation, the church doesn't always do the things we think it should. We don't always get our way, but that might be a good impetus, motivation, prompt to remind us that our journeys of faith, after all, are not really about receiving. They're not really about getting. But each and every day, we can give. Amen.